Hi friends, my name is Heidi and this is going to be episode 2 of the Books and Cables podcast. It's a really exciting week. I just got home actually from Wabi Sabi's weekly knit night, so I'm feeling good, feeling all of the knitting inspiration. And I have 2 finished objects to share with you this week, as well as some works in progresses that I cannot wait to get off the needles. So before I get started though, I did want to tell you a little bit about a knit along that me and some of the folks in my local knitting group are planning on starting together on December 24th. So this is going to be a knit along where we all cast on at the same time on December 24th an adult size garments for ourselves. That's pretty much the only rule that there is. I'm going to be casting on a rose cardigan, and I'm really excited actually for that because I'm really looking forward to having sort of a loose and comfy cardigan that I can wear as sort of a lounging around, but something I can also dress up too. So if you would like to join us, the hashtag is a little bit crazy, shall we say. It's long. It is hashtag Mocha Loca Christmas Madness Cal. So if you want to join us, let me know, and I would love to see a photo of everyone's cast on Christmas Eve. So that said, I'm going to jump into all of the knitting goodness that I have to tell you about today. And the first one you already can see, it is my finished Etoile Ourse by the wonderful Pool TB. She's a designer and the dyer behind a sort of local to me yarn company called Urso Yarn. She's based in the Montreal area, and actually tomorrow I believe she's going to be setting up for the Vibration Market hosted by La Maison Tricotée. In conjunction with that, she's releasing 2 new yarn bases, one of which is in this sweater. It is the Urso Nord base, which is a chunky weight, 80% Quebec Dorset wool, unsuperwash treated, blended with 20% nylon, as well as a marshmallow hair base. So I got the chance to test knit this pattern, which she designed to go with those 2 yarns, which was fun and very quick knit as well because it is a chunky weight yarn. So what I used was the Urso Nord for the whole body, but in the cowl neck area I actually held a strand of marshmallow hair double, which is what's called for in the pattern. And that's actually one of the things I really like about this pattern, because I think it's a great introduction for people who are not used to using non-superwash treated yarn, so not the most baby soft of yarns. I personally find more rustic wool not very itchy, but I'm not very sensitive to that. I even wear Icelandic wool next to skin, but I think that this particular pattern would be a good introduction for someone who's not used to more woolly wools, because of the detail of having the mohair in the neck area, which is where a lot of people are the most sensitive. So it is not going to make it like butter, but it does take away some of the pick from the most sensitive area. So I think that was a really smart design choice. Another thing that I like about this pattern is that it is a really good pattern for a beginner. So it is actually a little bit different than a project that I would typically take on, but test knitting is a special occasion, I suppose. And I'm still trying to make up for the fact that earlier this year I completely failed at a test knit. So this time when I said yes I would test knit a pattern, I decided I needed to commit to it and finish. So it is a little bit different than what I usually take on, because it is a little bit more simpler than some of the things that I typically like to do, because I see every pattern that I choose as a challenge for myself to learn something new. And In this case, I don't think I necessarily learned anything new, but that doesn't mean that's anything to do with the pattern. That's myself when I like to take on sort of 12 colors or something weird about the construction or something like that. But what that means is that this actually is a pattern that I would recommend for someone who's, say, new to color work, new to knitting and ambitious and want to try a sweater, or just want to try their first sweater after making lots of accessories and things like that, where you don't have to do the sort of construction techniques that you would for a sweater. So I'll explain some of the things that you'll either need to know or can use this pattern as an occasion to learn. So this has this detail of a rollover brim. Basically how you would do that is you knit kind of double the amount of the rows that you want for your brim, and then you fold it over and you knit into your cast on row. It kind of how do you say, sews it together. It takes the live stitches and combines them with the cast on edge, and it creates this sort of very professional finish around the neck area. And similar but different to a tubular cast on. It's a little bit different effect because you get this sort of foldy edge, unlike a tubular where you would just have a sort of nice seamless edge. And then you have this cowl neck, and when you get to the neck part, you actually have to do a little bit of German short row. So if you've never done that before, this is an excellent opportunity to try it, because the chunky weight of the yarn means that you don't have to do it very much to get that drop on the back of the sweater, which you want to make garments fit a little bit more comfortably. So if you don't have these short rows, what happens is the neck will be centered. So it'll be right up against the front of your neck and right up against the back of your neck. What this does is actually drop the front lower and make the back higher, and that just is a little bit more comfortable and well-fitting. It makes sure that the front of your sweater isn't riding up, and it actually meets the bottom when you actually put it on, if that makes sense. So German short row, which is my favorite technique for doing short rows because it looks seamless. So I find the wrap and turn sometimes leave a hole in the fabric, and even the double knit where you have you knit into a stitch, I find that also leaves a little bit of a lump. So I like doing the German short row because it's deceptively simple, but it makes a really clean finish. And you also do a little bit of bobble stitches. This is actually the sweater that kicked off my whole bobble kick and how I started doing my popcorn sweater, which I showed you last week. So it's just a really easy bobble. It's not where you have to flip the work around and purl. You just kind of cast on a bunch of stitches and then decrease them immediately again, just to get these extra bits of yarn in there to make this nice texture. And of course you do sorry dude, that was immature. You do stranded color work, so if that's new to you, it's fantastic because again, the chunky weight, it looks like you've done a lot of complicated color work, but you don't actually have to do a lot of that because the rows are shorter, because there's not as many stitches per row. And she includes actually a really good increase in here, which is almost invisible. So I don't know if you can see it. You can see one right here. So I actually did it wrong the first time. I did it, so basically when you have a stitch, there's a couple of loops like this. You can't see that because I've drawn in the air, but I didn't read the instructions, and so on these loops of the stitches, so you have the one live one at the top and then you have a bunch of stitches underneath. I thought you had to pick up the leg of the 2 stitches underneath and then knit into it. that's not what it actually is. You have the 2 loops, you pick up the one immediately underneath, and then you knit it through the back loop, which does the increase kind of behind where your active stitches are, and because of that it makes it a sort of seamless increase that doesn't interrupt the pattern at all. The first way I did it completely ruined the pattern, so I actually had to rip it all the way back and restart it again, even though so I basically plowed through the yoke section. I did it all in one night and then woke up the next morning, looked at the pattern and realized it wasn't good, so I ripped it all back and reknit all of it again. So that was super fun. But now it looks beautiful, and that is achieved by actually reading the instructions the pattern calls for. So that's nice. And then it does do sort of a quote-unquote non-traditional finish on the cuffs and the bottom. It doesn't call for the normal ribbed edges. Instead, there's a roll hem at the bottom and a sort of garter-like cuff. So that's, and then you use the contrast color for the fronts here. So that's super interesting, and if you're like me and you hate ribbing because it feels like it goes on forever, this actually is a nice break from that. And you do also, well, obviously you can learn how to do just a basic top-down sweater construction. It's super easy, so that's why I think it's great for a first sweater, because basically you make a circle, you knit, you increase until you have a wide enough to accommodate your shoulders and are at your kind of armpit area, and then you just divide the sweater into 3 parts and then make 3 different circles. So you knit down the body and then you knit down the arms. It's the easiest possible way to make a sweater. There's nothing to sew with it. You just pick up the stitches for the underarm and continue knitting. So there's absolutely nothing to the finishing, which is fantastic if you've never made a sweater before, because as soon as you finish, you're finished. So you can put it on and have something to wear and be proud of. So that's, and there is some basic shaping. It is an A-line, so it means your bust is the smallest point and then it grows outward toward your hips. There's no waist shaping, which is when at your bust you decrease rapidly to the waist and then you gradually increase out to your hips. So it has an A-line shaping, which is a very gentle sort of increases. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so it introduces the concept of shaping if you've never had to do shaping before. So overall, I really like this project because it's super warm and cozy. I might be reserving it for when I'm expected to be outside, because it is a little bit warm because of the chunkiness of the yarn. But it does get down to -40 here in Ottawa, so it will not go to waste. So I wanted to tell you about this pattern because it is being released tomorrow, November 30th, and when a pattern is being released new, and I know people want to know a little bit of detail about it before they commit, because at the beginning there's not as many patterns for you to compare between, so I thought it would be helpful to tell you a little bit about that. So this is my first finished object, and now I'm going to tell you about my second finished object, which is technically 2. And those are my Slytherin socks. Here they are. I've already worn them actually a few times and I didn't block them first, but you don't need to block socks. But I'm worried that they're a little bit felty already, but I don't know if that's necessarily the fault of the yarn, because it has been disgusting outside. It snowed, it's damp, it's icy. I already fell down for the first time this season and it's not even December yet. It was a very dramatic slow motion fall too. I was walking along and then I felt my foot go and then I was like, oh no. And then I just kind of accepted my fate, and I was like, okay. And then fell down. So it was not very dramatic, actually. So the opposite of what I've said. It was kind of like oh, this is what's gonna happen. So very annoying. But these socks are super warm. Actually, one of the days I wore both this sock and this sweater into the office because I work pretty close to where I live, so it was just a quick jaunt over to the office, and I got into the building and the heater was on and I could not take off my coat fast enough, and it was like bright red. I was overheated. I had to take off my boots for about 10 minutes and just kind of sit very still to cool down. It was way too warm. To tell you a little bit about the way I knitted these socks, so basically I started from the cuff. I did a German twisted cast on or the old Norwegian cast on. They're just two different names for the same technique. There's lots of video tutorials on it, so I can link you to one that I find. I pull up a different one every time. I just kind of Google it, and the first one that comes up is the one I follow. But it adds an extra loop to your cast on, so it's a little bit stretchier. I don't really feel like it's stretchier than like the plain long tail cast on, but I honestly don't think it adds that much stretch compared to the normal cast on. I think it adds enough, like less stretch than I would if I had just cast on with a larger pair of needles, but it's a little bit, if you like your cuffs to be a little bit tighter but not strangling, I think that's a good option for you. The one I've liked so far for the length of socks that I've done is the tubular cast on, although I don't necessarily like the look of that because I prefer a 2x2 rib here, and I don't want to do the faffing around with moving stitches around to make a 2x2 tubular. So yeah, you know, you have to make these decisions based on, I don't know, aesthetics at the time. But I cast on German twisted cast on. I knit basically a long tube because I wasn't sure, since the last pair of socks I made didn't really fit my foot. So what I did was, instead of knitting the sock to a negative ease, I knitted them to measurement. So when I say negative ease, it means that what you want from a sock is that it's slightly smaller than your actual foot size, because it's supposed to stretch, and then that will allow it to stay on your foot. I just knitted it the full length of my foot, which means the socks were enormous when I put them on. And so this time I wanted to be sure that they were properly fitted, and I also wanted to be able to split the stripes, since this is a self-striping sock yarn. Did I tell you what this yarn is? Okay, if I didn't, it is the Slytherin Socks on the Biscotte base from the company Biscotte yarns. Although I am now debating with myself, is it Biscotte yarns or is it Biscotte yarn? Because I feel like Biscotte actually makes more sense, but it's spelled differently than Biscotte. So either way, it is the Harry Potter inspired colorway from one of them. They have all 4 houses. So I bought the Slytherin ones. I actually also bought the Gryffindor ones, which I'll show you in a second. And because I wanted this I didn't want to do a contrast color because I wanted to maintain the Slytherin-ness of these socks, which I was shocked to discover I was a Slytherin after thinking my whole life that I was a Ravenclaw. But whatever, I took the Pottermore quiz and turns out I'm a Slytherin. Actually, one of my friends was also sorted into Slytherin after thinking she was a Gryffindor for her whole life, and then she just like made a new account and took the quiz again. And I was like, took the quiz again until she got the house she wanted, which is Gryffindor. And I was like, it's a pretty Slytherin thing to do, to trick the system. But whatever. In order to keep the Slytherin-ness of the sock, I decided I wasn't going to do a contrast heel, toe, and cuff, because that would be adding a new color to it. And then it became, so I wanted them to be full Slytherin socks. So I decided to use the self-striping sock as the heel, toes, and cuffs, but I did them Afterthought, which allowed me to find, so I basically put them on my foot and then figured out where my ankle bone was and used that as a guide to determine the length of the sock. And then I found the closest stripe, and then I split it in the middle. So I cut one thread, one stitch in this yarn, and then, well, first I picked up, so I did, these are 64 stitch socks. I picked up 34 stitches on each side, and then unraveled the center when I cut one of the stitches, and then I decreased, I moved one of the stitches to the front, and I decreased 2 stitches in order to close the hole that's there on the gap. And then knit in the round. I made sure to start from the middle of a gray color in order to complete this stripe, because I split, so every stripe is about 8 rows, so I split it at 3 and 4, and that meant this was half a stripe. So I started halfway through the striping so that when I knit it in the round, it would finish out this stripe and then start the green. And as usual, I didn't do the Kitchener stitch to finish the heels and toes. Instead, I closed it like you would a hat. So basically, once I did gradually decreased down to the point where you would normally do the Kitchener stitch, instead of pulling out a needle and doing the Kitchener stitch, I instead rapidly decreased. So I decreased every single stitch and knit 2 together, all of them, and then I did more decreases until I got to a point where I could thread the yarn through all of the stitches and pull it tight. Excuse me. So I'm really happy with those. And of course, that wasn't the only yarn that I bought from Biscotte, or Biscotte. I also got the Gryffindor colorway because I wanted some recognizably Harry Potter socks. So these are my Gryffindor socks. These are such bright colors. It makes me happy to look at it. It's not like the maroon and deep gold nonsense. It's like bright, poppy, kind of very like first movie where everything was still cheerful and they were still young kids, instead of like the dark moody of the later movies, especially Prisoner of Azkaban, where they like really changed the whole look. I like them all, so it's not a criticism. It's just that these are very bright and cheerful and happy. And I also really like that it's variegated. So the same with these. I like that it's not just a solid green or solid gray. I like that they look kind of like watercolor. Is that? Camera cuts me off at 23 minutes. Okay, I get it. I'm gonna talk faster. That's all I had to say about those socks. I'm excited to finish them. They're Afterthought everything. So I'm interested to see how that experiment is going to go. Basically, I'm gonna knit a very long tube and then cut in the heels and toes and cuffs. I'm suspecting 2 pairs of very long socks. No, 2 pairs of very short socks or 1 pair of very long socks. We shall see. I'm almost out of battery, so now I'm trying to talk quickly. I started a new sweater. Isn't she beautiful? So this is the Ramblin women cardigan. It has a steek front. And what I'm doing is using my leftover Brooklyn Tweed Loft from my last couple of projects. Specifically, I have a lot of Hayloft and Fossil left over, and I also have some of the blues. So I didn't actually have to buy a lot of yarn for it, which is fantastic, since this is a pattern which uses 12 different colors. Not really, I think that's an exaggeration, but I think it's close. The reason why I have so much Brooklyn Tweed Loft left over is actually a sort of funny but kind of long story. But when I made my Galloway cardigan, I actually misread the pattern a little bit. what I thought said Brooklyn Tweed Loft actually said Brooklyn Tweed Shelter. And Brooklyn Tweed Shelter is a worsted weight yarn with about half the yardage of Brooklyn Tweed Loft. So it's like 180 yards versus 300 yards for the loft. So when I purchased the yarn, I bought the amount of skeins you would need for the shelter, but I bought loft. So it said like 10 skeins of gray for 180 yards, and I bought 10 skeins of the 300 yard loft. So by the end of the project, I was like, why do I have so much yarn left? This yardage estimate is crazy. But then I think literally 2 months after I finished the project, I went back and read the pattern, and I was like, oh, it's a shelter. So it's fine. Actually, I really like that I used loft, and I would have maybe made that choice myself anyway, because it is, both these yarns are woolen spun yarn, which means they expand a lot. After you wash it, it sort of blooms and fills in the gaps. What that means is too that the gauge doesn't really matter. The suggested gauge on the packaging is just a suggestion. The woolen spun nature allows you to sort of use a variety of gauges from very, very tight to very loose, but controlling how kind of drapey or stiff you want the fabric to be. So by choosing to do it the loft but using a US 7 needle, I got a very kind of drapey and lightweight and breathable fabric compared to if I used the shelter and used the US 7 needle and got a more sturdy fabric. So I'm happy with the choice I made, but that is why I have so much loft, is because I basically bought double the amount of yarn I needed. So the main color was the hayloft in that yarn, and so I have a lot of hayloft left, which is that gorgeous kind of gold yellow color. And I think that it is very striking when used with the main body color of the purple on this sweater. And I particularly like how they are both flecked with red, and that really pulls the two colors together, and with the flower in the center. I'm just past the arm divide, and I think it's knitting up super quickly because it's very interesting, and and I'm really excited because there is a steek in the front, so I have to cut it in half, which is one of my favorite things to do because it's so liberating to cut into your knitting. I know some people find it scary, but I can't explain why. It's like a little bit of an adrenaline rush, I suppose. So those are the two. Well, actually, so when I planned this whole episode out, because there surprisingly is a bit of planning going into this, I only had 2 works in progresses that I started this week. But actually, since then, I went to Wabi Sabi. And inevitably, before I get to sit down at their knit night, I had to go around and touch everything. And I actually made it through that unscathed, except for... Actually, no, I didn't make it through entirely unscathed. Unscathed. So I actually bought some of this, which is my favorite color combination, the blue and the yellow. It is the Mondium, which is the Portuguese yarn that everyone is super into. I'm sure you've seen this logo before. And so I thought that was it, because it was a cheaper skein for a pair of socks. Because it's not, you know, sometimes for hand dyed you're paying like $40 for a skein and you get 1 pair of socks out of them, maybe 2. So that, I was like, okay, $16 for a skein is not bad. And I thought I made it out alive. But then, what were they doing? They opened a package of yarn that I've been searching high and low for, which is the West Yorkshire Spinners Christmas colorway. It's called Fairy Lights. And it's not going to be just those colors, it actually makes this pattern. So this is the book that comes with the yarn, and it's the sock pattern that comes with the yarn, in fact. And so I had to get it, and in fact I immediately cast on again, I'm gonna do Afterthought everything because what I want to do is knit this entire ball and then figure out where to go from there. So that is why I got some red to go with it. So these are going to be my Christmas socks, and those are going to be super cute. As you notice, I am entirely obsessive about knitting socks now, after going from maybe a month ago where I'm like, I'll never finish a pair of socks. Well, look where I am now. I can't stop knitting socks. And I think the reason why I'm super into it right now is because I discovered this Afterthought heel. So the sort of recipe I'm using is Susan B. Anderson's smooth operator socks, and that's where I discovered the Afterthought heel technique. I didn't discover it. I learned about the Afterthought heel technique, and there's so many variations in that pattern. I super recommend it if you're looking into getting into socks and you want to do them cuff down. So I purchased this sock recipe / pattern, and that has changed the way I'm approaching socks, because it's turned socks from this thing where I knit a whole bunch of stuff and then I have to turn a heel, which is difficult to do wherever I am because I have to kind of look up the instructions for it. What I can now do instead is just knit a lot, just plain stocking net stitch, and that means too that I can just enjoy the process of knitting through it without having to worry about following any sort of pattern, and I think that's quite liberating. That's pretty much all I have to share with you this week. The other exciting thing, actually, so the knitting content is over, but I did want to share with you something exciting which I decided to start, which was to have a knitting meetup, a new one every Saturday. So if you're in the Ottawa area and getting downtown is convenient for you, every Saturday we are going to a place with cake from 1 to 4 and knitting and chatting. So that has been, we had the first one last week and it was a blast, and I got so much knitting time, and then in the end we actually went out for dinner too, so it was a full day of knitters and chat and lots of sugar, maybe too much sugar. So that was awesome, and I'm gonna do the next one in 2 days from now. It's Thursday, so on Saturday we're gonna have another one, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's one of those things where in the winter time I just want to kind of recluse and be a hermit, and that's great, but I think I start to go a little bit stir crazy if I don't talk to anyone but myself after a while. So it's fantastic to have an excuse to go not just outside but downtown, where I have a bunch of restaurants that I used to love because I used to live in that area. So yeah, I'm never gonna say no to a chance to go and eat and drink and talk to wonderful people. So that's pretty much it for this week. Thank you very much for joining me. If you wanted to find me, you can see my social media on Ravelry and Instagram. I'm at Books and Cables. And I hope you have a wonderful week, and I wish you all the success with your projects. And I'll see you next time. Bye!